Hey everyone, so today I will be going over all of the books that I read in September. I read a decent amount for how busy the month was. I did DNF a lot though because of the very slumpy mood that I've been in, and it probably just has to do with the stress of school. It was really difficult for me to find a book that would capture my interest, and so I DNF'd a lot. I did end up reading 16 books, which is great. A few of them were picture books though, but I'm still very happy with that number for sure. So I'll first go over all the books that I DNF'd and then talk about the books that I did finish. The first DNF that I will mention is The Fortnight in September, and I only DNF'd this because I want to read it within the month of September. And I had started it, but I just couldn't finish it by the end of September, and I'm just one of those weird people that needs to read seasonally, and this book is set in September, so there's no way that I'm going to read it in October. I will save it for next September, and that's completely okay, but I was enjoying it. I just really want to read it in the month that it's actually set in, so next year. I also DNF'd The Doll Factory by Elizabeth McNeil, and this is one of those books that I expected to absolutely love. It's historical fiction, it's set in the Victorian era, it's a gothic mystery, and it just felt like a book that I would absolutely adore. But there were a couple things that made me very uncomfortable, just the way that the author explained this character's thought process when it came to like sexuality and things like that. It just made me uncomfortable. It wasn't this big scene or anything, but I just didn't want to have more of that throughout the book. And I was also really grossed out with the taxidermy that is mentioned in the book. Just the way that one of the characters goes about getting specimens for his taxidermy thing that he has going on. It was just very, very gross, and I'm just not in the mood to read anything that gross right now, so I'm putting it down. I don't know if I'll pick this book up again. I did think the writing was very beautiful. I just wasn't really connecting to the story, and again, I was very uncomfortable. Next is The Circus Train by Amita Parikh. This one I actually was enjoying while reading, but it is historical fiction, and I was reading another historical fiction at the time, and that's the genre where I can't read two historical fiction at once. I have to space them out, and I do have to return this to the library, so I haven't gotten to it yet, but eventually I will read it because I was enjoying it. Next is The Fifth Wave by Rick Yancey, and this one I DNF'd because the main character was very, very annoying. It is YA dystopian, and I do really enjoy dystopian books. I haven't read many of them, but they always, I'm always drawn to them. It's like a post-apocalyptic sci-fi, and I was expecting it to be a very quick read, something that would just draw me in right away. And while I was interested in what was going on at the beginning of the book, I just couldn't stand the main character. She was very, very annoying. This is YA. I think I do prefer more adult main characters who act like adults, but that's just me. And September was also very slumpy for me. I definitely struggled with some of my reads, so this one also got DNF'd. Two more DNFs. We also have Elsewhere by Alexis Chaikin, I'm pretty sure is how you pronounce her last name. This one's literary fiction, and I was just struggling to focus, and with literary fiction, it's not always the kind of book that will draw you in, that will captivate your attention the way that other genre books do, and this one I feel needs a lot more of my mental attention, and it's not because it's a difficult book to read by any means, but it's just not a fast-paced kind of edge-of-your-seat story. At least the first 30 pages that I read are not like that. And so I definitely will want to get back to this book, but when I can actually focus on the story and not have to use as many brain cells, because September, half my brain is with nursing school and the other half is for reading. So it's been a little difficult, but I will try this again at some point. And my last DNF, and I'm a little bit sad about this one, but that is Quartet in Autumn by Barbara Pym. I may come back to this at another time, but it was very, very slow moving. It is about four people in, I'm pretty sure their 60s, and their day-to-day and their struggles within the workplace, outside of the workplace, and it was interesting, and I found the main characters to be very endearing, but it is a very slow book, and I just needed something fast-paced and not this. So we'll see if I end up reading it again. I do want to try Excellent Women by this author because I do own it, And if I really enjoy it, then I would definitely want to read more, so I may come back to this in the future. Next, I'll go over all the picture books I read in September. These first 3 I gave 4 stars to. They were very, very sweet. The first one is Beauty and the Beast, and this is illustrated by Kanuko Craft. And this is one that I did read in elementary school, so I wanted to relive that experience and feel some nostalgia. So I definitely really enjoyed this one, and the artwork was just beautiful. I don't know how to describe this artwork. It's definitely very fairy tale, fae kind of style. But yeah, I just absolutely loved the illustrations. And this is based off of the original Beauty and the Beast tale, so it's very different from the Disney movie, which I really appreciated. Oh, just look at this. But yeah, beautiful story. I gave it 4 stars. We also have Cinderella, which also has beautiful illustrations. And this one was set in the 17th or 18th century. Loved this one. And another very sweet picture book, we have Goldilocks, and this one is retold by Ruth Sanderson. Again, the illustrations were just so cute. They melted my heart. I really enjoyed these 3. And then there are 2 picture books that I gave 5 stars to. First is one that I would say is now my favorite picture book ever. And it's just because I love Christmas so much, and it's a very simple children's rhyme, but it just captures what Christmas means to so many people, and I love it so much. And that is Season of Light by Jess Redmond, illustrated by Ramona Kaulitsky. And this one, 5 stars. It just melted my heart. It is exactly what Christmas means to me and what it meant to me as a kid especially. Just as an example of the rhyme, it'll say, "After red and green dreams, we wake up before the sun. We're counting down December days, but savoring each one. This is a season of joy." Then it would have another rhyme and say, "This is a season of blank." And it just made me so happy. It warmed my heart. I love this artist's style of illustrating. But yeah, this is definitely a favorite, so I would highly recommend this one if you do like picture books. And this last picture book is one that I read because Mitzi read it, and I got it from the library right away, and I'm so glad that I did. 5 stars, and that is Anne Arrives, and this is adapted by Callie George, and the artist is Abigail Halpin. And this is basically like an abridged version of Anne of Green Gables, very abridged, in a children's book edition. And the illustrations, again, here's Mrs. Rachel Lynde. I loved this book so much. And if you've read Anne of Green Gables or watched the movie, you know exactly what the white way of delight is. My heart. But yeah, this book just captured my heart. It was so precious. And if you love Anne of Green Gables, please read this book. It captures the essence of the book, and it's just beautiful. All right, so now for the main novels that I read this month. First, we have The Coming Storm by Regina Hansen. This is a YA historical fiction with a fantasy twist inspired by Anne of Green Gables, and it's set in Prince Edward Island, which I really loved. In this book, we have our main character Beatrice, but she goes by Beat, and one day she sees her cousin's ghost. Her cousin had passed away at sea, and she sees his ghost, and then there is this sense of impending doom. Something is coming. As the title suggests, there is a storm brewing, but not the kind of storm that she is expecting. When she sees her cousin Gary's ghost, he does play this very haunting song on his fiddle, and it just adds to this anxiety that Beat feels that something is going to happen. Gary's mother actually passes away shortly after he has died, and this woman named Marina shows up in town saying that she is, I guess, the heiress. She is inheriting the house that Gary grew up in and everything that comes with it. But this woman, Marina, is very odd. There's something very different about her, and Beat is trying to figure out who she is and what she's doing in their little town. And then the locals start talking about some very strange things that have been happening, and I'm not going to say anything else about the plot, but the story picks up from there. It's very much inspired by Scottish mythology. It's very atmospheric. There are very stormy island kind of vibes, and it's just beautifully written. I did think this was middle grade, but after reading it, I definitely would say it's for an older middle grade audience or even young adult, but I wouldn't say there's anything like inappropriate for middle grade readers. I would just go in cautiously, but this book I really enjoyed. I gave it 4 stars. The characters all resembled characters from Anne of Green Gables, but they were still very unique that I do not feel it was like a ripoff of Anne of Green Gables by any means. They were all very different. Our main character, Beat, is like Anne, and she has a friend who is like Diana, and that friendship definitely reminded me of Anne and Diana, but it was very unique, very different. There is a Gilbert-like character, which I also really liked, but the author did something very different. Again, this was very unique, but definitely inspired by Anne of Green Gables. I also loved the build up to the ending. I think the ending was really well done. The one thing I will say is this book is present tense and first person. I don't mind first person if it's past tense. I don't mind present tense if it's third person omniscient, and that's just me. That's just my weird preferences. But when first person and present tense go together, I'm just not the biggest fan. There are exceptions. Certain genres, I feel like first person present tense really gets the plot moving, but I just, in general, don't really like that kind of storytelling. But I didn't mind it so much in this book. I definitely felt a connection to the characters, and I felt very interested in Beat as a character and what was going on. But that is the one thing that I didn't really enjoy. And it did have a little bit of angst. I wouldn't say it was very strong, but it was YA, so it is what it is. I did really enjoy it, and I gave it 4 stars. I would highly recommend. Next, I read The Old Curiosity Shop by Charles Dickens, and I had such an odd reading experience with this book. I landed on a 2.5 rating, and I'm not sure that is accurate because in some ways I would rate it higher, in some ways I would even rate it lower. But Dickens just has a way with words, he has a way with characters that I always find it interesting, even if I'm not really enjoying the story. But yeah, I just wasn't really feeling these characters. I wasn't feeling the storyline, and the ending especially. I will say the villains in this book were very interesting, and like I said, I couldn't even tell you what this book is about. I'm not going to go into the plot, but there is a very awful villain. His name is Quilp. Could not stand him, but that's just Dickens doing his job. But yeah, Quilp was an interesting villain, but I feel like the rest of the book was pretty lackluster, and there were moments where the plot didn't really go anywhere and nothing was happening. Just a lot of characters moving around, traveling. And yeah, that was about it. It was just too long in my opinion, but it was a decent book. The ending didn't do it for me. It resolved nothing, and it just left me wanting more. There was a really funny moment though. There's a character named Kit, and he is basically talking to this girl, and she's definitely into him. And I don't remember if she was trying to like fish for compliments. I'm pretty sure she was. And then he said something like, "You're beautiful." And she was so happy. And then he's like, "So's your mother." And that made me laugh out loud. Savage. Kit was a little savage, and I really loved that. But other than that, it was pretty much a lackluster book for me. I also read 9 Perfect Strangers by Leanne Moriarty, and this one I gave 3 stars to. So I went in expecting it to be a thriller, and it wasn't a thriller. Maybe the last third of the book started to have some thriller elements, but it definitely was not a thriller. It was a character study. And if I had known that going in, I probably would have given it a higher rating, because I do like what Leanne did with her character studies. I do like how she went into each character's psyche, and I just found that very interesting. But I was constantly like, okay, when is the thrilling element supposed to happen? When is this, when is it gonna come? But it was very interesting. This book is set in a health resort, and you have 9 strangers showing up at this health resort for various reasons. It's very zen and very calming and solemn, and they all show up for their own reasons. Each character was very unique, very interesting, brought something different. And yeah, that's basically what my thoughts are about this book. It was interesting, but I definitely wanted more. There was also some adult content I could have done without as usual, but it is what it is. I did enjoy this book, and I'm not sure if I would recommend, because it was a very odd reading experience, and it's definitely a book that I feel you're either going to really enjoy it or just not care for it. So I'm not sure if I'd recommend it, but it was pretty decent. Next, I read a middle grade that I really enjoyed, and I feel like this author is the author for me when it comes to middle grade, just based off of this book. I did give it 4 stars, but I would definitely say it's a great middle grade. I really loved it, and I want to read everything by this author now. and that is The Secret of Nightingale Wood by Lucy Strange. This is such a beautifully written children's book. It read like a children's classic, and I absolutely loved that. It's about this girl named Henrietta, and her family moved to this house. Her father has to work outside of the country, and her mom is very, very ill. And you have this girl, Henrietta, and her baby sister. And at this house, Henrietta starts to notice some things about the woods that is by the house, and she finds this very odd woman in the forest, and she's not sure if this woman is a ghost or if she's a real person, and they form an unlikely friendship, and the story goes from there. The story really does revolve around Henrietta dealing with her mother being ill, and the doctor that is providing care is not a good person. It's very, very sad to read. Her mother seems to be ill with something on a mental level, and it's just very, very sad. I wouldn't say there are like major trigger warnings for this story because it is middle grade, and I feel the author did a very good job of gracefully talking about the different issues that this book was talking about, but just be aware that it does deal with some mental health and a not so great doctor. Yeah, this book was just beautifully written, very atmospheric, and I loved the main character. I think she was 12 in this book, but very mature. Not an annoying child by any means. I really, really enjoyed it, and I would definitely recommend, especially for this season. I then read a book for my third time through it. This is my third reread of this book, and that is The Blue Castle by Ella Montgomery. This book is in my top 10 classics of all time for good reason. It's amazing. I adore this book so much. And just a quick little summary of what it's about. We have a main character named Valancy, or Valancy. Everyone pronounces her name differently, but the audiobook narrator pronounced it Valancy, so I'm just going off of that. But Valancy is 29, unmarried, and in the 1920s, I'm pretty sure this is set in the 20s, you're an old spinster if you're 29 and unmarried, and her family does not fail to continuously remind her of that. Valancy is a very timid and shy person who just lets everyone step all over her because she doesn't have the courage to stand up for herself until she receives some news about her health, and this basically sets her on a mission to fully live and enjoy life and look for a potential romance and do different things that would just bring her joy and find her blue castle, which is a home that she has been dreaming of for years, and she just wants to live in peace and have joy in her life because her family is not about that. I'm just obsessed with this book. Third time reading it, and I won't stop because it's incredible. And if you have not read Ella Montgomery, this is a great place to start. The writing style is very, very easy, very simple, straightforward to the point. It's a perfect classic to start with for sure. Next, we have a book that I buddy read with Katie from Paperbacks and Ponytails, and I feel so bad because she loved this book a lot more than I did. And that is The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux. This I only gave 2 stars to. I was not expecting to only give it 2 stars. I was really hoping to love it a lot more, but it just was not the book for me. I'm not sure what I can say about the story without spoiling it, and that's the case with a lot of classics. It's really difficult to describe the plot, but I will say it is about a girl named Christine Daae, and she is an opera singer in the Paris Opera House, and she starts hearing this voice, I guess like teaching her how to sing, kind of instructing her how to become a better singer, and it's believed to be this ghost that's been haunting the opera house. Christine has this love interest named Raoul, and he is also trying to figure out who this ghost is, what's going on, and that's where I'm gonna stop. I'm not gonna say anything else because I feel like it spoils the story, but I was just so painfully bored reading this book, and I feel so bad because I know this is so beloved by so many people. There are definitely moments of, you know, high stakes and edge of your seat kind of situations, but it just didn't do it for me. I was really bored. I didn't like any of the characters. So yeah, unfortunately this book is just not for me. Next up we have The Well by Stephanie Lansom. This is a biblical fiction story. It's the first in a trilogy, and I have read the second book in the trilogy before. I actually own it. It's called The Thief, and I remember absolutely adoring that book. But I never read the first one. You can read them out of order. So I ended up picking the first one up in September, and wow, this was a beautiful story. I gave it 4 stars. It was very impactful. This is about the woman at the well, or the Samaritan woman, who in the Bible was a woman living in Samaria, and she basically was at this well, and the Samaritans and the Jews did not mingle. They had very different ways of worshiping, and so they just did not intermingle or anything like that. But Jesus shows up at this well and asks the woman for a drink, and she is in utter shock because he's a Jew. And then he kind of asks her about, her family, her husband, and the story goes from there. I don't want to say too much else, but if you have read the story of the Samaritan woman in the Bible, beautiful story, so impactful. And it just shows Jesus' love and mercy in such a beautiful way. But yeah, that's what this book is basically about. Interestingly, though, the main character is the daughter of the Samaritan woman, which I absolutely loved, getting her perspective. And we have another perspective. It is a man named Shem, I'm pretty sure is his name. Yeah, so it's Shem. And he basically has to flee his town because of something that he did, and he could get in big trouble with Rome. Rome was, the kingdom that had control of Israel and all the, I guess, like Mediterranean and Middle Eastern countries at this time. And so Shem has his own demons that he's fighting, and our main character, Mara, she also has her own issues. And the plot really brings these two characters together in a beautiful way. I really enjoyed that. So yeah, I will say this story is very impactful. One thing that I didn't like so much was that the epilogue, while it did make me cry, the epilogue was so beautiful. It definitely made me very emotional, but it did kind of come out of nowhere, and I wish there was more of a build-up to what happens. I won't say anything else because it'll spoil it, but besides that, this was a beautiful story. 4 stars, and if you are a fan of biblical fiction or want to dip your toes in biblical fiction, this is definitely a good place to start. I also read Demelza by Winston Graham. This is the second book in the Poldark series, and I overall really loved this. I gave it 4 stars as well. This one I didn't love as much as the first book, just because there were a lot more chapters focused on the mining finances and all of the administrative work that goes behind mining in this Cornish town. And I would just zone out during those parts. It was very boring and difficult for me to read, but every moment spent with our main characters, Ross and Demelza, and all the other characters, I loved so much. I can't really say what this book is about without spoiling the first book, but it does focus a lot more on Demelza as a character, which I really loved. She is first introduced in the first book as a kitchen maid for Ross. Things start to develop between them, and I really loved that. But again, in this book, we get more insight into Demelza and Ross and their life, and we're introduced to a doctor, Dr. Dwight Ennis, who, if you've seen the show, you know who he is. He is just the sweetest. I love him so much. But interestingly, I like him a lot more in the show than in the book. In this book, he kind of is a little bit more morally gray, I would say, than in the show, but I still really loved seeing him in this book. If you don't know what the Poldark series is about, it's basically about a mining community, and you have upper class people who own the mines, and then the lower class are working in the mines. It's set in the late 1700s after the Revolutionary War in America, and our main character Ross has returned from fighting in the Revolutionary War on the British side. He's returned home to a completely destroyed house, and his father has passed away, and so in the first book, he's trying to, I guess, bring life back into his farm and the mines and everything, and then this book continues with his story and that of Demelza and everything. Love this series so much, and if you do like historical fiction as well as Cornwall as a setting, I would definitely recommend. Next up, we have Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe, and I would say that it's good to go into this book as blind as possible, not really knowing what goes on, because I feel like even knowing some of the things that happen at the beginning of the book takes away from the reading experience. So I'm not going to go into the plot, but I will say that it is set during slavery in the States. I'm pretty sure it's the mid-1800s, and our main character, Uncle Tom, is a slave, and it's just a harrowing story of slavery. But Harriet Beecher Stowe did write this book as a way of bringing, I guess, attention to why slavery is a human rights issue, and considering it was written in the 1800s, I think that's very powerful, considering it was also banned in a lot of the states where slavery was huge. But yeah, very impactful for sure. So I haven't actually rated this book, and I still don't know what I would rate it. I'm thinking maybe a 3 stars. There were some moments that were definitely exciting, some moments of higher stakes, but then there were definitely moments as well where I just was taken out of the story and wasn't really enjoying it as much. I just wish I was more captivated by this book. It is very, very interesting, and I do not regret reading it, especially because it's a classic, and it's one that was on my list of classics I need to read, my list of books that I need to read by the end of this year, so I'm glad that I read it. There were some really, really interesting conversations between characters, and there were also some conversations where I wish I could have given my 2 cents because I disagreed wholeheartedly, but it was definitely interesting to read. Yeah, I did feel many different emotions reading this book. There were some very, very sad and heartbreaking moments, some really funny moments, but overall I just wasn't as emotionally invested in the story as I was hoping, so I think 3 stars is where I'm leaving my rating. Not sure how accurate that is, and the star rating system I'm not even the biggest fan of, but I guess I would give it a 3 stars. I also read an Agatha Christie in September, and that is Halloween Party. I probably could have read this in October, but I'm not a Halloween person. I don't like Halloween. The only reason I read it is because it's Agatha Christie and I want to read all of her books. But this one, I'm not going to say too much other than it is centered around the death of a 13-year-old girl, so if that is something you can't read, just be aware of that. The story does start off at a Halloween party for school-age kids, and a murder happens, and the story goes from there, and with Agatha Christie, it's good to go in as blind as possible. There were definitely some fall vibes, and I found the mystery to be very interesting. I definitely was very suspicious of who ended up being, revealed as the killer, so I wasn't as, blown away by this story, but I did give it 3.5 stars. I think it was really, really fun, and definitely a good Agatha Christie to read in the fall time. I would definitely recommend. We also have The Asylum by Karen Coles, and this one was such an interesting reading experience. So it's about a woman named Maud who is in this lunatic asylum in the early 1900s. I'm pretty sure this is set in England. It actually never specified where it's set, but I'm pretty sure it's England. So she's in this lunatic asylum and she has complete amnesia. She can't remember a single thing that happened, how she ended up there. And so we have this doctor who tries to use hypnosis to revive her memory. We have another doctor who is just a terrible human being, but the, I guess, more kind-hearted doctor is trying to figure out what happened to Maud, how she ended up here. And yeah, the story is basically us uncovering how Maud ended up in a lunatic asylum because she believes that she was a scientist. And so we get flashbacks throughout each chapter, and I really, really enjoyed that. I really like how the story was told. It was very, very atmospheric and fast moving, very, very captivating, and the writing style was very nice. It's a perfect book to read in the fall. I think the story was very well told. There was a lot of tension build up, and the reveals were really, really well done. A couple things that I didn't like: there were a couple very, very gross sex scenes. I've read books with scenes like that were more graphic, but they would just make me laugh and I skim over it. But just the way that it was written in this book was so gross. It was so, so gross. And it just didn't fit in this story. I don't think it was necessary. I just feel like so many books nowadays, they just need to have at least one of those scenes to make it sellable. I don't understand, but it just did not fit the story. It was very, very nasty. And then the ending as well, it was very, very fast and too quickly wrapped up. There are certain characters that I really, really like, but you don't really know what happens to them at the end. But other than that, I do think that it was a really good story, very atmospheric, a good kind of historical gothic novel, and it's good for fall. So I would recommend if this sounds like something interesting to you, but just be aware of the trigger warnings and the content. But yeah, I did overall enjoy this. That book was actually the last book that I read in September, but I'm also going to mention a book that I finished the first day of October, I'm pretty sure. And I'm just going to mention it because it's fresh in my mind and I read the majority of it at the end of September. So that is On the Cliffs of Foxglove Manor by Jamie Jo Wright. This one I overall enjoyed. I would say it's my least favorite Jamie Jo Wright so far, but even saying that, I did give it 3.5 stars. So it's a lower rating than the other ones, but I do think it was a really good story, and I really, really love Jamie Jo Wright's writing style. I will always pick up her books just because of her writing. As all of her books are, this is dual timeline, historical, and present-day mystery. And in this one, we have our historical timeline in the late 19th century. We have Adria, who is sent by her father to Foxglove Manor, basically to look for some treasure that his old pirating partner, I guess, is supposed to have had at this house. Her father was a big Great Lakes pirate during the Civil War, and he tasks Adria with uncovering some of the supposed Civil War, I guess, booty that was left at Foxglove Manor. Adria starts to notice some very odd things, some very sinister things in this house, and starts to see what she believes is a ghost. And then in our present day timeline, we have a girl moving to Foxglove Manor, which is now like a long-term care home, and she moves there with her brother who is autistic, and he kind of becomes a resident while she ends up working as like a care worker or a personal support worker. And this character, Kaylee, she also starts to uncover some things about Foxglove Manor, its past, and starts to experience some very sinister things as well. Kaylee was also kidnapped as a child and then returned safely back to her parents. No one really believed her. People thought that she just ran away for the fun of it, but she's still trying to figure out why on earth she was kidnapped, who these people were, and it's just a very mysterious and odd circumstance. But yeah, these two women in these two timelines living very different lives, things start to come together and things start to be revealed, and it's overall very, very fun. I did guess the villains though of both timelines, and I kind of wish that I was more surprised. I wish that it was different, but I just thought it was very, very obvious. But I did still enjoy it. Again, I love Jamie Jo Wright's writing style, and I would definitely recommend. All right, everyone. So that is it for all the books that I read in September. If you've read any of these books, please let me know what your thoughts were in the comments. And if you don't have a channel, I would also like to know what your favorite and least favorite reads were from September. Please let me know as well in the comments. I'm very, very curious. I'd love to know what stood out to you in September and the books that just didn't really hit the mark for you. So that's it for this video again. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you all in my next one. Bye!